Good afternoon, everyone. How are you getting on? I hope you're good. And as ever, send us your comments so you tell me that you can hear me and that signal's at least vaguely stable, etc. I'm making a note of who does that on a regular basis, and they are in for some treats because Physio Matters has got lots of cool stuff coming out soon. So if you are one that regularly tells me that all's well and sends the first emoji to tell me that it's live and it's working and it's kicking, then yeah, my appreciation will come through in various treats in very, very soon. In fact, in a few matter of days, actually. Now we've got some big announcements, which is cool. We've got a guest on today, so we're going to be talking a bit about private practice stuff. The mighty Katie Knapton is joining me today, and I can see her shaking her head in the lobby now. She's going to be upset. I'm going to overhype her intro, and she's a very humble lady who won't accept any compliments from me, so I'll do them before she comes on. But yeah, brilliant thinker, someone who I really value her opinion on various things. You might have heard from her at Therapy Live, for example, talking about online consultations, etc. And she's someone that definitely, when she speaks, folks should listen. She's someone that definitely gives a lot of thought to a variety of different issues, and it's important that we consider not just the clinical things, but also the things, the mechanisms, the infrastructure that means that care delivery can occur. And when it comes to private practice at the moment, various things are in states of flux. And so we sometimes need for us to pay some close attention to it, which is what we're going to do on today's show. Many thanks to Simon Francis and Jackie Hughes. I don't know why I couldn't say that then, for saying that all is well with our sound and that you're getting this. There's always a slight delay. But yeah, it's all coming through loud and clear, which is good. Also, towards the end of the show, if I remember, I might tell you a little bit about this, which keep an eye on social media later, which is going to be that we're announcing all the sessions for Therapy Live Sport, which is on the 7th of November, and releasing the final 1,000 tickets that are available. Oops. See, when I do that, I lose my frame. I feel naked. There we go. That's better. I feel better. Right. Anyway, without further ado, let's get Katie on and get stuck into a few issues in and around private practice. Let's make sure this works. Katie, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jack. Thank you.
Good. And you're furiously shaking your head at my intro, as ever. You don't like that sort of stuff, do you? So tell us a little bit about, well, I suppose, can you set the scene on why we're talking about this today? What's relevant in private practice land at the moment?
Well, yeah, I think it came through a number of our emails as private practitioners about some charges for healthcode, which I think probably not everyone knows what healthcode is, so I perhaps need to inform you of that first. Yeah. So healthcode is a practice management software which a number of physios, and probably it will be a majority more medium-sized physio practitioners will be using to use as an e-billing service. It does do some e-practice stuff, but I have no idea what that is. So I've only used it ever for billing because you can do multiple billing at one time. And it had most of the insurance companies on there, and you could just bill them on one platform. It sounds really clever, and it does sell itself as the UK's official medical bill clearing company, dealing with 20,000 plus and daily. But it actually was a very clunky system. But I seem to end up using it myself for just AXA PPP. Even though I still don't know why I'm still doing AXA PPP, but that's another conversation. And they just announced that they're going to be charging us. So it was free, and obviously there was some cost presumably to the insurance companies. But they were charging us $6.99 per clinician, and then 25p per transaction. So basically this has started a conversation. I was obviously, well, I'm quite bad-tempered at the moment, so it really wound me up. I'm having a few weeks of bad temper. I'll get through it, but at the moment, yeah.
It's all relative. Like, you're bad-tempered for you is worth saying. Like, relative to most of us, you're still mild-mannered. Let's say.
No, I'm a little bit angry. So I just thought.
Yeah, go on. You poked the bear a bit on social media, and
right.
You weren't alone in being frustrated by this news.
No, and so what I've been doing is just collecting the best way to try and avoid these charges. They then have sent out a further email, which actually annoyed me even more because it made it sound like actually it's free to low bill users, but actually it isn't. So it says the e-practice software is free, but you are still going to be charged $6.99 per practitioner for billing. So any way of using their system is going to cost you. So we want to try as much as possible to move away from this. And obviously it also opens all the discussions of the poor pay rates, intermediaries, PMI, the normal can of worms. But there is certainly ways for certainly the sort of sole practitioners and smaller practice to avoid using that. But I've also been talking to Physio First, who have started some discussions but haven't had any feedback yet. And they're doing a talk on Friday, I think. But as far as I know, they haven't. I spoke to Karen Lane yesterday, and they haven't got any more information on it yet. So that's where we are with healthcare. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, it's definitely something that we don't. There's probably no need, I think, for us to get really stuck in the weeds on healthcode, because there's some information that might come to bear, but also it's more what kind of worms it opens, and it just feels like another way in which private practice is getting screwed at the moment, and that fundamentally these are fees and charges that assume were fed forward, or were the actual insurers were taking some of that on. And that, maybe the circumstances in and around the pandemic has meant that healthcode have had to then, roll the dice on this way and trying to then recoup costs elsewhere. But it's just yet another way in which this is squeeze, another part of the way in which private practice is going to then be compromising the fees in which they can collect from well, it's just increasing cost and then not changing necessarily the yield. Do you think that this healthcode thing is it that it's triggering and opening that can of worms, or is it that there's something more particular here that's sort of is there anything sort of new to it?
I'm not sure there's anything deeper other than it's, financially based, and I'm sure everyone's taking a hit, and including insurance companies, definitely. With companies going down the pan struggling, it's probably the first thing to go. And only, 10 to 12% of the population are covered by private health anyway, which makes me question more. Anyway, never mind. I just start thinking, well, why we could just avoid it a little bit. But the other thing is, there is an issue with lots of people come back to me going, well, I'm under this contract, so I can't. I have to say I'm not under many contracts. I seem to have managed to avoid that. But I would also have a conversation with the patient. Because if the moment you phone Vitality and say, oh, can I bill you directly, they're going to say no. So if you talk to the patient and say, I'll treat you, but I'm going to have to bill you, it's a different conversation. But I'm also not sure about, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not sure they've changed their terms and conditions. Can they force you to actually pay to bill? I would question that. So I'm sure there are kickbacks that we can do, and the other way is we will talk with our feet and we just say we're not doing it.
Well, there's two things there, isn't there? There's when in contract, it'd be so strange if they were able to move the goalposts that way.
Yeah.
Or if there was some small print in which we use this as an intermediary, we use this other intermediary, that then if they choose to bill you, then that's not on us. It'd be very strange, but it could exist in the small print. But that's one thing. But it's more that there's going to be people that need to know about this when they're starting to, these private practices, especially at the moment, they might be plucky upstarts that are for some reason wanting to wade into this space, that might be then not realizing that they're signing up to fee leaks here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes it's the lack of transparency that occurs to this sort of stuff that's most frustrating. What's before we go into the race to the bottom, I would call it, and start talking a little bit about whether these intermediaries are worth the time of, and what recourse we have for that, and how we want to try and, sometimes I feel that the patients do get caught up in the middle of this a lot of the time, and it's not their fault. They don't realise just how unscrupulous some of their insurers are. But how can we, at the moment, circumnavigate healthcode, do you think, in terms of this, and not succumb to those charges?
Well, a majority. So AXA PPP, you can invoice directly using their email. WPA are one of the best ones. You can actually do your normal rates and email them directly. So it's really, to be honest, Vitality that tend to be the outstanding one that is a problem. And the rest you can normally get round. I'm sort of going off. I was thinking there, beyond healthcare, there's these ones that are managed, these sort of company policies that have an intermediary. So the Aviva that has Nuffield Fusion managing their physio, that gets more complicated, because usually with Aviva you get 10 sessions of physio, but actually if it's managed by Nuffield Fusion, I think you get approval for 2 to start off with, and then you have to go through the process to apply for more. So there's a lot of complications. My advice to someone setting up now is just get the patients to pay. Don't get involved because patients will pay, and if they can get it back, they will get it back. But if you're offering a good service, I cannot, you're going to get what 90% of the population are not covered by health insurance. So should do okay by getting a good reputation.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I think it's become ever apparent when we have this conversation, whichever thing that triggers it fascinates me as to the fact that we've got no obvious recourse. There's no mechanism for any sort of appropriate collective bargaining. It only takes for a certain percentage of any given profession or side of the industry in MSK more broadly to serve those patients at low rates. And therefore, there's no way in which we can exert a market force that would make the insurers stand up and listen to that. And so instead, it just ends up being this creeping fee drop that, I can very rarely see a way in which we can find a point of standing up to them.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly difficult. And I must be a couple of months ago, there was quite a nasty conversation that I quickly exited about someone who was taking £20 for patient appointments, which to me just is appalling. But then I also think, well, actually, I'm just as bad. I'm still on AXA PPP, and they are now paying me less than I earned 17 years ago. So, but that's only because some mates were insured by them. I'm going to come off it. But sure. It is a tricky one, and it's quite emotive. So the moment you say, look, we've got to make a stand, we're worth more than this isn't professional to be selling our services so cheap, is you get people going, I need to feed my family, I need a full clinic. And it takes a lot of trust for someone to say, actually, if I set my bar at this amount, which is appropriate, I will be all right. So I'm not quite sure how we can win that. And obviously, we can't act as a unit to do it either. We have to be a little bit careful. It's a very difficult one.
There's an interesting point here from Sarah, which is definitely something I wanted to come to. And thanks for reminding me, Sarah. She's said it's on top of the insurers that have been happy to pay for face-to-face treatments when patients were submitting invoices, but they're insisting on their own physios taking over once remote sessions had to be done in lockdown. So there was some real sleight of hand going on, and then there was people charging differently for virtual to face-to-face, even though face-to-face couldn't legally, or well, at least ethically, exist, especially in the stay-home orders. That speaks directly to your expertise as a digital consultant. What was your take on that? And did you feel that was just another way in which it was disrespectful to the medium of our expertise being shared virtually at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just so frustrating, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I don't really want to say, just the despair. If you've done a skilled online appointment and the patient's appropriate to then be seen face to face, quite clearly nothing should be transferred. That patient is under your care.
Yeah. At the heart of that, just because do you think that it's because the insurers are likely to think that the intellectual property, if you call it that, or the skill set is in our hands rather than in our heads?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I had discussions with Bupa about, it must have been, in 2016 about, how useful video could be, but it needs to be done well. And they certainly have always seen it as an inferior model, which, I mean, but we have this problem within the physio world, to be honest, that still a lot of people see it slightly inferior. But it is, it's just, we're just undervalued as general. Our knowledge, our skills, and just the coaching mentality that we can use to help patients progress through, they just don't recognise how valuable that can be in a virtual environment. Yeah,
well, thinking about how we could move forward with it then, you've been involved in various capacities and always a thoughtful observer of what we've been doing with the big R's with MSKR. And the reason I bring that up is because it speaks to a little bit of the clinical excellence work that's been done where we were making a case. And even though the main argument that was made in the manifesto for reform and policies developed because of it was around this idea of, why don't we strive for chartership to mean something? And we used an example across things like chartered surveyors, chartered clinical scientists, chartered accountants, in saying that these were professions in which had then been able to raise standards in such a way that then there's a sociological market force almost. It's just if there's a respect there and there's a collective bargaining that kind of comes for the ride in that means that it's so unlikely that then anyone in that profession of a caliber would accept rates that are low, and so they have a higher chargeable value. I'd say that medicine, for different reasons, ends up in a similar sort of boat, whereby there's just this obvious flaw to their fee rate. Now, what we've made the case for is that MSK industry needs to sort of find a way to develop a consistent credibility that then means that the floor doesn't keep falling away, and that we end up with this race to the bottom. Is it something that is complex on a governance level, and that we do need to do those complex, multifaceted reforms that we're arguing for? Because I make that case fairly regularly, but quite regularly as well, I get the pushback that enough fist waving of a certain flavour, and I'm probably being a bit disrespectful to the argument, but it's more that actually it doesn't need to be as complex as that, Jack. We just need to stand up and be counted. And it's like, well, I'm just looking for the mechanism for it. I just wonder what your general take is as to how we could actually move it forward. Am I over making it too complex, or is it that it's messy?
I think it is a bit messy. So I think the problem is that if you have your own clients, your own clinic, and they know you, they like you, and whatever you do, whether it's evidence-based or not, as far as you're concerned, you are providing a wonderful service. And so if you ask, a proms, they'll be really happy with it. So I think, I think it is more complex than that. I do think I'm really pushing that people do gather outcomes. I know it sounds like madness, but there's lots of people who don't, and ideally I think it should be a validated one. I'm still on the KISS principle, and I will stay there for the moment. So I do the PSFS, and I'm not moving as yet. Wow. Although Emma Salt did talk about, I said I wasn't prepared to pay for MSKHQ. So PSFS is free and really simple and patient orientated. But I think we got to get that basic grounding. And if we can get that commonality, which obviously MSKR is working on, I think that would be somewhere to go from. But I don't think it's simple. Yeah,
I think if we can think, then it doesn't need to be much of a hypothetical. It's happening every day. But let's just say any given insurer is saying that we pay £20 for initial assessments now, and let's just be generous and say it's 5% of the private practice profession, or the MSK industry. There's 5% of clinicians even that are willing to do that, and that they are willing to then scale up their own operations and potentially even recruit some of their pals, or work themselves to the bone on that and see volume in order for them to actually take on what they might want to. Say they're junior physios with a low ceiling to what they were trying to achieve and take into their households. What mechanism do we have to stop that happening? If they're, I really struggle with this. I can't think of how we could fix that.
There's nothing we can do other than, as a quality body of good clinicians holding together and gathering outcomes and not in clinical evidence and knowledge to prove to, so be it insurers or intermediaries, whatever, that actually getting good quality care pays off in the long term and is cheaper. And that is the only way we can do it. But that's going to take time. And as you say, it is complex, it's multifaceted. We'll have to work out the best way to gather information, which is what we're trying to do and move forward. But it's not simple because we can't stop them. But long term, in the end, you hope patients will talk with their feet, because they won't be better if they're not getting the right information and good quality care. A certain percentage will get better anyway, but.
Well, I know, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that you've heard me say before. It's so easy to be a poor practitioner and increasingly hard to be a good one. There's the forces that are at play there, and the patient care aspect means that sometimes in our game, you've got people that time passing was sufficient anyway, and then they attribute the results sometimes inappropriately. If we were to then think about how that example can play out, there's no mechanism for it as we're describing. I'm glad you've not then pulled some out of the hat there that I've missed, because I've thought about this fairly deeply. But what sort of outcomes, etc., people that are against that idea of presenting appropriate outcomes, etc., and making the case on a governance level for quality, etc., there's this concern that sometimes gets raised that these are just, they're that unscrupulous that's just an excuse that they're sometimes bringing forward, and that fundamentally, even then, you jump through these hoops and they still wouldn't make they still wouldn't flex. Do you see that as being reasonable, or do you think that actually that there is a rational market force at play that they would then listen to that reason?
I guess it depends on how you sell it to them. I mean, we're not going to change everybody, and not everybody's going to move forward with us. People don't like change. We all get, quite established in the way we do things. I think we need to be careful. I mean, I haven't worked in the NHS for a long time, but we do poor patients just get questions after questions after questions. And I sometimes, how much data do they actually need to collect? So I think if you can prove to that body of, can I call them laggards? Is that a little rude? Try not to be. That if we can prove to them that what we're asking is in the patient's interest, then hopefully we could get a percentage moving forwards with us, and I think that would be great.
Well, one of the things with the patient aspect is that I'm deeply concerned that the mechanism that I lean on, and it's helpful because we built this clinic fairly recently, and we're under no illusions that we're 90 plus, I don't know, 95% cash pay, and so typically it's something that admittedly I've kept away from, because I saw that as being an important part of how we set up the business model here. It's not without its challenges, especially at the moment, but it's something that we've tried to protect ourselves from that way. However, it does feel unfair that these patients that are then insured by someone that they've then, or through their work, they're often insured, say, and it feels unfair that they might want to seek care from us, and we're having to say that there's these, for example, Bupa and AXA don't allow for top up anymore. It's not as if I can then say that, this is what you need to pay on top of what the fees are that your insurer will cover. You're not allowed to do that technically now. So it just seems like, I do think that the patient gets stuck in the middle of this. I really feel for them. Is it going to be that we just have to be honest with them and be clear? Because I suppose succumbing to it is going to just compromise us, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, we just have to be honest and hope that can be raised, so it can, it can go back and talk about the company policy not, being adequate to cover their needs. I can see there's quite a few questions about professional bodies standing up for our. Yeah, it is an issue, and Physio First are involved. I just thought about it, and they are trying to talk to healthcode. There is an issue that we cannot act as one. And because of the competition license, I don't know the legal aspects, but I mean, I would just check that you contact Physio First, check you contact CSP. I mean, I've had a good old rant recently, so that if you've got issues raised, but they cannot set a fee.
No.
You're being unrealistic.
And I suppose that's the thing, and it wouldn't be that me and you would call for that, even though it's that. So Philip said here, just to unpack his comment more thoroughly than I can pull up on screen, perhaps we need our professional bodies to have some balls and help us stand up to the private insurers rather than sitting on the fence. A strong foundation in the belief that professionals working in the profession may help to stop the floor falling from our pricing. Emma's then weighed in, saying that's what we've been saying, but got told it's not their responsibility. Really, I thought they were there to support us. Now, this is worth mentioning that it seems, for it to have taken for us to enter a global pandemic, and for the for the chessboard to be truly up in the air, for us to realize the extent of which, or the pressure that is put amongst some often voluntary individuals within our member structures. So, for example, Physio First is what was originally called a special interest group, now a professional network associated to the CSP. However, we've recently come to find out that all of these special interest groups, now professional networks, are actually independent bodies that then had their funding cut from the CSP Central. Now, there's reasons for that, and we needn't go into now. But what I'm getting at is that Physio First's board is a voluntary body to then assist and promote standards within private practice. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think that in this instance, though, it just seems that the complex governance, for overuse of that term, that seems to be applying to private practice, not just on this issue, but more broadly, about standards. There's been an issue recently about how, when Public Health England are contacting someone that's been in full PPE and essentially closing down their clinic because of loopholes or misunderstandings from the contact tracers, etc. It's like, who's representing that? And then the CSP are often the ones that we understandably wave our fist at, but what we end up with is that no one is actually, who is the named, I think this is something that you've said, Katie, is like, who is responsible for that, and what insight do they have? I can't, and I'm someone that works closely with the CSP in various different capacities, love-hate relationship over the years, but in generally we're pretty cordial these days. But I'm trying to think of someone either within the employ or that's certainly someone that's paid their paid role to understand the nitty-gritty of not just these issues we're talking about, but others surrounding private practice. And I do struggle, and I think that that's fascinating, because I think about the money that collectively we must spend, and the monopoly that seems to occur within that. The fact that we're all sort of sometimes just obliged to feed that money forward on a monthly basis, that we might never need them in a trade union dispute for actual specifics on us as individuals, but collective bargaining for private practice seems to be a real gap. So I've said my piece there. There isn't even a question associated to it, Katie, because I don't want to just sort of bandwagon you for the sake of it, but it's just that I don't know what your thoughts are on the fact that many do just get frustrated at the fact that our professional bodies don't seem to stand up for us in this space.
Yeah, I'm afraid, because I have been one who's just recently sent a slightly yes, I have tried to highlight to the CSP that I just don't think they understand the financial and the stress that we've been under. The pressures have been huge. I mean, I'm now in a I am the only income earner in my household. So life is different and hard, and I just don't think there's any recognition. But they are coming back to me with various suggestions. But the initial suggestion didn't go down very well, that we can all, go and work in the NHS. So I have just had an interesting discussion. But all we can do is we can try and, as a voice, keep on mentioning to them, contact them, try and ask. I mean, I felt we should have some mental health support supplied by the CSP, because you don't have that if you're self-employed. There's lots of stuff that I think should be done. So let's use our voice and come on, let's email them, let's contact them, let's be more demanding.
Yeah, well, that is what's fascinating, is that at the heart of it, in a structural and sort of constitutional level, we are the CSP. It's a member organisation. It's member-led. We have an elected council, etc. I totally get that. It just seems that the response rate that is required on issues like this is such that those mechanisms, those levers that we might try and pull as individuals or as groups of members, it's challenging. I do feel for them. I think that especially in the early days of the pandemic, I was quite impressed with the way in which they were able to rally, and I know they were working all hours. I just think that unfortunately the structural vulnerabilities that you, I, and many others have spoken about over the years, and some of the internal contradictions to their structure as an organisation, I think that they've not necessarily, maybe I'd be open to their critique of this analysis, because it's definitely something that they often push back on. But the fact that an instinctive response sometimes to the fact that we might have his head in his hands and be saying, look, my business is about to collapse through seeming, through no fault of ours, it was otherwise successful, and with a sensible bit of adapting, we've been able to get through this. If only those that were said to represent me would understand this side of the sector that I've been paying good money into for a long time. The response being, well, there's plenty of public sector vacancies right now, is something that I can't help but see an ideological bias there that seems to be relevant to the fact that our professional body is also a trade union, and the macro, the large P politics that are attached to that I'm not saying they need to be ashamed of, but they need to at least admit those conflicts of interest if they exist, when folk like us are having to raise that with them, and often faced with this idea that, well, if there's public sector vacancies, unless it's a gross job shortage, then it doesn't seem to be something that would be worth them pulling a lever on. And I'm massively concerned about that. It's definitely not something we were ever going to solve in this half an hour. But for those that are listening in, especially Emma, Philip, any of those that are commenting across various different channels that we've got this show goes out on. If you fancy joining to talk about this at any time, then please know that this show is exactly for you and for these conversations. Don't need to be you, but please do send your feedback, and we'll share that. And because this discussion needs to roll on, and also for us to get responses from those that we've talked about as well. But thank you so much, Katie, for raising it and shedding some light, especially on the nitty-gritty with regards to health code. Any developments, I'm sure you'll weigh in, not just on the comments, but maybe we'll drag you back on air at some point as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Jen.
Nice one. Thanks a lot.